Chapter 13 Revelations. Harry's head in the fire was calling for Ted, but only Andromeda had answered to the appeal. Ted was working a shift at San Mango, due to finish very soon. She promised Harry to let him know he called. "Can you tell him it's quite urgent?" Harry asked before to pull away his head. Sunrise was eating with gusto a flan in her high chair, and Harry, pacing up and down the kitchen, was occasionally shooting her fleeting glances. Then, unable to resist to the impulse, sat on a chair in front of her, and for the third time since Ginny was gone, asked her, "Sweetie, in your dream, what color Joe's hands were?" But she didn't answer, all taken by her flan. Harry took a green rug from the kitchen counter. "Like this one?" he asked, showing it to her. She shook her head, carefully putting her half-full spoon in her mouth. "Like that one?" he asked, pointing at the yellow curtains. Sunrise looked casually at them, and then shook her head again. "Like this sea," she chirped, tugging from the flan again. Harry didn't know what to think. It was exactly that sentence that had rang the bell in his head at George's place when he was recounting about his injury. He had frozen in hearing it, remembering Sunrise exclaiming the same while talking about her dream, and hadn't been able to focus on anything else the whole day. When Ginny expressed the wish to go visiting Luna to chat some more about the wedding, he had strongly encouraged her to go that day, to have some time to mull everything over. Unfortunately, the thinking only enhanced his sense of foreboding, making him restless. He hadn't shared this new discovery with Ginny. Sure, she would only minimize the event. But Harry was growing seriously alarmed. The coincidences were starting to be too many. He needed somebody objective to talk it over, somebody completely bereft of bias. And in desperation, the only person that came to his mind was Ted. Normally, he would have been unwilling to reveal that much to him. Despite everything, he was very young, and it didn't seem right to turn to him when problems arise. It ought to be the other way around. Harry wanted to be that person for Ted. But for some reasons, it seemed he was the only one having always issues, and in the end, without any other option or nobody to turn to since Hermione's wasn't there, and notwithstanding his reticence, it was him, with his 38 years, the only one asking for advice. After having paced up and down the kitchen an uncountable number of times, and having asked Sunrise the same question once more, a crackle of fire made him large to attention. Ted was in the fireplace, white as a cloud, his baggy jumper hanging loose on two very skinny legs. Sunrise exclaimed delight at his name and outstretched her arms to be picked up. His smile softened, and, humbling over her to comply, said to Harry, "I thought to pop over. Grandma said it was." Yes, it is urgent," Harry tailed off impatiently, but then, reminding about good manners, asked, "Would you like something to drink?" Ted, puzzled by this abrupt change, faltered at the moment, taking Sunrise from the high chair. "Yes, please, a glass of—" But Harry, unable to concentrate on anything else, interrupted him again. "Ted, I need your opinion." Ted looked at him concernedly. "All right," he said, taking the glass of water he was about to ask from the sink with his free hand and sitting on a chair. "It's about—" Harry commenced, but paused, hesitatingly looking at Sunrise. Children at that age seemed never to listen, but they were recorder machine, ready to repeat everything at the wrong moment. He had learned his lesson already. Sunrise knew more swearing than all of them put together, and she was always coming out with them out of the blue in front of Ginny. "My daughter," he concluded. No reaction from Sunrise. Ted relaxed against the chair, sighing gloomily. Yeah, I thought you were going to notice it sooner or later, he said, stroking absent-mindedly Sunrise's curls. Harry was bewildered. Did you know already? Why didn't you tell me? How did you realize? Ted shrugged. It was kind of obvious watching from the outside, but I was waiting for you to mention it first. Harry, speechless, dropped on the chair in front of Ted. But, he stammered, dumbfounded. Has she recounted you the dreams? When? Ted's brows knitted. What dreams? Harry was silent. He looked studiously at Ted. What are you talking about? Ted was silent. He looked with ingenuity at Harry. Nothing, he cooed, smiling reassuringly. What dreams? But Harry wasn't fooled so easily. We'll get back to this, he admonished him, but keen to have his story out of the system first, he recounted everything to Ted agitatedly. Ted listened carefully without interrupting, sipping his water. Sunrise was playing with the green rag, only occasionally repeating words at random. When Harry got to the end of his tale, telling him about George Hans, Ted, like Ginny, seemed everything but impressed. I don't see why you are worrying so much, he began, at which Harry nearly got a breath of relief. If even Ted thought it was only his mind working too much, it must surely be so. Better be crazy and imagining things than what he was afraid of. But as he was ready to hear, you are reading more than there is in it, / you are a lunatic, / your daughter is absolutely normal, / stop being so neurotic, Ted continued, absolutely chill out. She must be a seer. Harry was so taken aback, he got in a paralysis for a moment. Sorry? He only managed to stutter. She must be a seer, Ted repeated, in the fifth essence of calmness and matter of fact, as if only disclosing about Sunrise being clever for her age or having a cough. Seeing the bemused expression on Harry's face, he asked, Why? What did you think? Harry, speechless, looked at his daughter, who was humming a song cheerfully with a bit of a snot down her nose. She looked everything but a seer. He stood up and with a handkerchief cleaned her face and took her from Ted's arms, who was still waiting for an answer. I guess that, but I hope to be wrong, he said, agitated in the end. Why? Ted asked, puzzled. It's not normal, Harry exclaimed, bewildered by Ted's lack of comprehension. And scary, added hastily, squeezing Sunrise protectively, because indeed it felt quite so. Ted laughed. I disagree. It's neither one nor the other, he said, standing up and getting some bread from the kitchen. I still didn't get my dinner, do you mind? He asked. Harry shook his head, still dazed, and with his wand made appear some food on the table to be eaten with the bread, impatient to hear what Ted had to say on the matter. Ted took some strawberry jam, and while spreading the bread, continued, It happens sometimes. It is not that bizarre. What do you know about seers? Ted sat down, chewing his sandwich pensively. They can see the future in many ways. Some get into trances, some with dreams, some in crystal balls. He took another bite while Harry was hanging from his lips. Usually women, seldomly muggles. Another bite. It runs in the family. It's hereditary. It's impossible then, Harry burst out, triumphant. Ginny would have told me if they had a seer in the family. Ted halted his eating to look at him meaningfully, arching his eyebrows as if to suggest an answer, but not seeing any sign of light behind Harry's eyes, prodded him. What about your family? Harry gawked at him. He was so accustomed in thinking the Weasleys his family that was prone to forget that she had one too, only none of those alive anymore. He halted to reflect on this staggering new notion. It could come from his family. He didn't know absolutely anything about them. Very little about his parents, less than little about his grandparents, nothing at all about the rest. He had often wondered if indeed there were some other distant relatives connected to him, but he had never felt the need to do any research. The Weasley were enough for him. However, this reflection had the power to calm him down. For some reason, the thought that this trait was something coming from his family made it seem less scary and unnatural, but more something to be proud of, a connection with the family never met. He looked at his daughter. There was a stretching her arm over the table to grasp the strawberry jam spot, and felt a wave of love for that curly, freckly small thing, and, as these waves usually coincided with spoiling, took a teaspoon, dipped into the jam, and gave it to her, who, happy, stuffed it into her mouth with a pleased smile. If Ginny asked, she ate boiled carrots, green beans, and fish fingers, he said pointedly to Ted. A balanced diet, Ted said, smiling, finishing his sandwich and taking an apple. In that case, you should make them disappear. If she finds them young untouched, it would be kind of obvious Sunrise hadn't hit them, don't you think? Very wise, Harry said, grateful, and, bringing them on the table with his wand, exhorted Ted. Dig in. Pushing it toward him. I just got a strawberry sandwich and I'm eating an apple. Eat it, Harry ordered severe. I'm your godfather and you must obey me. Hey, Ted retorted. I'm Sunny Godfather and I have a right to superintend their diet then. Only when I'm not there. Right now, I'm the responsible parent, and the responsible father wants our daughter to be happy. Are you happy, sweetie? He asked with a softer tone, giving her the pot so that she could dig in with more easiness. Yes, Daddy, she chirped, profiting amply of the opportunity. So, do you think she's a seer then? He asked Ted, who was observing the scene skeptic. Ted pulled the plate toward him and started to eat the veggies, leaving the fish behind for Harry. If what you say is true, she might be. Pay attention to her next dreams and see what happens. Harry nodded while making disappear the fish fingers in his mouth and asked him casually how Victor was. He was surprised they didn't marry yet, or at least move together. It was already several years they were a couple, and it seemed natural to him to take that step. He had imputed to Ted's unwillingness to leave Andromeda alone. But when interrogated on it, Ted admitted it was only part of the truth, revealing to Harry that his salary was still too low for him to afford a place for them. Magical habitations were quite expensive, even outside London, being few and difficult to build because of Muggle presence. Many magical people were buying Muggle swans and transforming them as Hermione and Ron had done. But it needed nevertheless a lot of money for the conversion, as usually experts needed to be hired, being the spells to perform many and complex, and permissions required. Ted couldn't afford it yet, not even adding Victoire's salary. When Harry found out about this difficulty, I'd offered him straight away Grimmauld Place, but Ted had turned it down, justifying their fuse with James and Albus' possible need for it in future. Harry insisted. It seemed unlikely they would have wanted to make any use of it. Albus, the only time I'd been in it as a child, had been so terrified that he refused categorically to put his foot in there again, even when a child no longer. And James was so repulsed by dark magic that I recoiled in horror seeing the house elves' heads stuffed on the wall. Therefore, it was his intention to buy a place each whenever they would have been old enough. He was actually starting with Ginny to keep an eye on possible good deals for James. Money had never been a problem. Harry was already rich by birth, and the situation only improved advancing in his career. Moreover, soon after Sunrise's birth, under pressure of media, he and Ginny had given another interview, posing for a family picture. Only the cachet for that one was enough for a very decent apartment. For that reason, He absolutely didn't need Grimmauld Place, and sure the Sirio would have agreed likewise, would have been happy to pass it legally to Ted, who seemed the only one at ease in it. Despite Ted considered Harry like an older brother, Harry considered Ted very much like a son of his own, and felt his duty to provide for him. But Ted wasn't of the same mind and was unwilling to accept money or costly presents from him. After a light chat, Ted was about to go. Sunrise stamped a quite wet and berry-flavored kiss on Ted's smooth cheek, and he stepped in the fireplace with some flue powder in his fist. Only then Harry remembered suddenly about the beginning of their conversation. "Hold on a sec!" he hooted before the powder could be released from his hand. Ted stared at him inquiringly. "Leave the powder and get back here," Harry ordered stern, beckoning him the chair he had just vacated. A look of comprehension dawned on Ted's face, and as he seemed on the verge of making a quick escape, letting drop of the powder, Harry glowered at him ominously. "Don't even think about it." Sunrise repeated the injunction, copying the same tone and expression, Herminaceous face all splattered with strawberry jam. "Sit!" Harry ordered, followed by the echo of Sunrise's voice, beckoning insistently for the chair, and Ted, reluctant, putting back the powder in the vase, complied. He sat tamely and looked at Harry. "Well?" Harry snapped, as Ted wasn't emitting any sound. "What do you think I should have noticed about Sunrise?" Sunrise sat to attention, hearing her name. "Harry, I don't know if," Ted said, all wavering, avoiding his gaze. "I want to know," he replied stern, while Sunrise was trying to catch his attention with a series of well-directed daddies. "Not now, sweetie. Let me talk to Ted first," Harry told her severely. "I need to pee." Harry sprang to attention immediately. There was always a very short time between the warning and the disaster, having Sunrise only recently dropped the use of nappies. "Don't try to sneak away," he barked in Ted's direction while darting to the bathroom with Sunrise. When back, as fast as he could, Harry was surprised to see Ted still there, having feared his escape. Instead, he was sitting composedly on his chair, tapping his long fingers on the table and looking outside the window wistfully. "Right," he said, putting back a clean face and empty bladder Sunrise on her high chair. "Now you let Daddy and Ted talk like good girl, won't you?" he told her, getting from a drawer a paper and some crayons and placing them in front of her. "Yes, Daddy, I'm a good girl. I make a flower," she said, grasping greedily a crayon and untacking the paper with vehemence. Harry sat down in front of Ted, who looked uneasy. "I'm listening," he said, drawing the chair a few inches closer with a steady gaze. Ted, agitated, ran a hand repeatedly in his white hair, and with each stroke they grew a bit longer. "I thought you must have realized by now." "Realized what?" Harry snapped again, falling slowly but steadily in a beginning of irritation. Ted paused, unable to find the right word. His hair was now shoulder length and shiny, reflecting the light of the fire. "Do you remember what Sunny's teacher told you about her whining?" "Of course. Did you understand the reason?" Harry asked, suddenly interested, his irritation checked in a moment. "I think so. Yes," Ted admitted hesitantly. "Why then?" Ted paused, looking at the floor, and then firmly at him. "Because you were low," he said, all in one breath. Harry thought to have misunderstood. "Sorry? What do you mean?" "When you are low, like very low, she's low too." Harry smirked uneasy. "You are kidding, right?" he said, shaking his head slightly and folding his arms on his chest, sitting back against his chair. Ted shook his head, his long and sleek white hair swinging softly around his face. "And I don't think it's only sadness. I think it's all very strong emotions." Harry sniggered. narrowing his eyes, an ear creeping on him. Ted, that's preposterous. How can you think something like that? It's impossible. Although, while saying that sentence, a subtle voice in his head was making his way, whispering, "You know very well it's not impossible." He shut it hastily in a twinge of fear, but his face darkened considerably. Ted stared at him a moment, but asked anyway. "When you went to pick her up that day, the teacher reported she had whined the whole afternoon, right?" Harry barely moved his head in an assent, glowering ominously at Ted. "What were you doing that afternoon?" "Surely no whining in my office?" He smirked, unnerved. "Harry, she whines because that's the only way a child can express sadness. What were you doing? Think about it," he asked keen. Harry snorted, annoyed. He remembered very well what he was doing. He was visiting the families of his deceased colleagues, and the heaviness felt that afternoon was still with him, but kept his surly silence, not wanting to admit with Ted that much. It was only a coincidence. It didn't prove anything. But Ted, accustomed in having to read Harry's mind when speaking about delicate topics, didn't need an answer and was able to interpret everything only from the bleak aura surrounding him. "And the teacher said it had been 2 weeks since he started." Harry was as rigid as a trunk and was by then not even nodding anymore. But Ted was already tumbling up with another question, standing up in his eagerness. "And the ambush on the Dark Wizard had been more or less 2 weeks before, right?" "Ted, it doesn't mean," he muttered darkly, but Ted interrupted him, walking to the counter and leaning against it in deep meditation, firing another question. "And when she was to my place and started whining, you were here reading, were you?" Harry, his eyes fixed on him, started to feel on the top of irritation, uneasiness too. But Ted, who wasn't waiting any longer for his answer and was only following his train of thought, continued. "And that night we were having dinner together. You were so pissed off, right? And Sunny was having a tantrum. When you stepped out, she kept in a bad mood for about 10 minutes and then quietened. What happened when you were out?" His hair had started to curl with every question, and by then were very similar to Harry and Sunrise, but of a sheer white. Harry was by then feeling less than assured. That night he was indeed furious, but he had met the boy then, and the strangeness of that encounter had calmed his rage. It fitted in a freakish way, but stuck in his stubbornness, not wanting to see the truth in Ted's words. He half smiled awkwardly, shaking his head. "It's impossible, Ted. She's only picking up the mood of the house." "No," he said, keen. "She's picking up your mood." Harry winced, plunging deeper and deeper in rigidity and irritation. He massaged his neck, trying to fight the discomfort. This tale of picking up mood wasn't new to him and reminded many gloomy and scary moments of a time in his life where it was him who was picking up strong emotions from another person, and the parallelism wasn't a pleasant one. Ted, sensing the obstinacy vibes emitted from Harry, moved towards Sunrise, picked her up, and gathering all the things she was using to color, brought her to the living room. She made her sit on the coffee table with paper and crayons and told her sweetly, "Sunny, I'll leave you here only for a moment alone. I'll be in the next room with Daddy, alright? I'll close the door, but you don't have to be scared as we are just there, alright?" Sunrise nodded energetically, taking back straight away one of the crayons, eager to continue her drawing. Harry stood up and was following this exchange curiously from the kitchen threshold. Ted closed the door behind Sunrise, and then, gesturing Harry to move, closed the kitchen's one behind them too. Harry smirked. "What now? Are you going to brainwash me? I warn you, you've got only 5 minutes. That's the amount of time Siri will stay by herself. he grumbled, sitting down mutinously. Ted smiled back and shrugged. Then he took his glass of water and filled one for Harry. How was in Diagon Alley today? Did you get the watch? Can I see it? Harry took the glass suspicious, but not sensing any trap in a question so unconnected with the rest, asserted an answer and went to get it to show it to him. He praised it and told Harry conversationally that he had been in the alley the day before with Victoire. The issues Harry encountered going to Diagon Alley were the same Victoire faced most of the time. She was stopped every few paces by men making declarations and exclaiming the impossible to catch her attention. Aware of the thing, Harry asked, cackling, "How was it?" Ted half smiled. "Nothing new, same far-fetched declaration. The winner remains always wrong anyway." "For what you told Victoire at Christmas?" Harry asked, suddenly curious, remembering what Victoire recounted the last time he had seen her. "Actually, that was just part of what happened," Ted admitted, a grin spreading on his face in spite of himself, and mischievously accosted his chair to Harry's and, leaning toward him, muttered something conspiratorial in his ear. Harry almost choked on the water he was drinking, and coughing let go to a burst of amusement so intense it brought tears to his eyes. Ted, smiling serenely, stood up. He went to open both the kitchen and the living room's door. Sunrise had paused in a drawing and was raked by a poor, mirthful laugh. Chapter 14. From now on, you must strive for happiness. Ginny was sleeping on Harry's side. Her silhouette was barely perceptible against the little light coming from the window. Harry couldn't sleep. It had taken him an enormous effort when Ginny had been back, cheerful and chatty from an afternoon spent with Luna, to hide from her what found out that evening. Ted was already gone by the time she got home, leaving Harry in stupor. Hearing Sunrise laugh, he had grown scared so suddenly and intensely that from the other room she stopped laughing abruptly, and after a faltering moment she had called him with a fretting little voice full of tears. And that mirror of his own fright worsened his state in a flash. He darted from the chair, backing away from that voice, while Sunrise burst into tears. Being in the other room, he couldn't see her, as she couldn't see him, and the awareness of it proved Ted's point beyond any possible misconception. Ted's ice-blue gaze was on him preoccupied, but as Sunrise kept calling Harry clearly terrified, Ted disappeared from the kitchen to tend to her, as Harry was totally incapable to move. When Ted was back with Sunrise, she had a congested red face, and as soon as she saw him, outstretched her arms, wanting to be held by him. Ted moved 1 or 2 steps in his direction, but impulsively Harry backed away in a fit of terror, almost tripping on a chair behind him, and moved quickly against the wall. Sensing it, Sunrise grew even more afraid and started to yell for Harry between tears. But more her fears heightened, sensing Harry's one, more Harry's fear soared, realizing it. Suddenly, he couldn't bear the thought to touch her, afraid of consequences he didn't even know. His brain, reeling so furiously, had stopped working completely, and could only remember his younger self annihilated by the Dark Lord burst of fury. Ted, seeing the situation was getting out of hands quickly, didn't come any closer. Called Harry's name, barely audible, submerged by Sunrise wiping and shrieking, but Harry managed only to shake his head frantically in reply. "Okay," Ted said steadily. "I'll take her to bed. You calm down. We will talk it over, but calm down." he said, rocking her, who, distraught, was flailing to reach Harry. "Sit down and calm yourself," he ordered before leaving the room, striving to keep Sunrise in his arms, who was yelling madly now, seeing herself being taken away from Harry. Her yells echoed in the empty house as Harry was in an utter blackout. He realized he was shaking, and it scared him even more. Sunrise shrieks heightened, and Harry, maturing the knowledge that it was him who was provoking them, forced himself to regain control. He took a big breath, endeavoring to fight the fright, and, in an impulse, flung toward the window, slammed it open, and stuck his head outside in the wintry night, filling his lungs with that cold air. His fingers, clasping the windowsill, became fast numb, but the chill of the night on his seething spirit was helping cooling down his mind. He withdrew from the window, going toward the sink, and opening the tub, splashed his face a few times. The yelling from upstairs was fading, and he fought again against the urge to be terrified of it. Instead, he sat down, and taking the green run Sunrise was playing with only minutes before, rubbed his face with it. Freeing his mind from thoughts had never been his specialty, but he tried at that moment, understanding the necessity of it. Taking big breath after big breath forced his mind in emptying, and perhaps because of the shock, perhaps because of the icy air filling the room from the open window, he plunged in a hypnotic state, while Sunrise, stifled crying, was getting fainter and fainter. Ted found him sitting on a chair, listless, half an hour later. He sighed, closed the kitchen's door behind him, and went to close the window also. "She's asleep," he only said, and Harry nodded in acknowledgement, not looking up. Ted went to the counter and filled the kettle for tea. None of the two spoke while the water was boiling up. The kettle's whistle broke the quietness of the room, awaking Harry from his hypnotic state in a startle. He clasped his head in his hands and roared in frustration. "Ted, what the fuck is going on?" he snarled, enraged. The green rag was still on his lap. He grasped it and threw it impetuously on the floor, springing up from his chair, and, combating the urge of kicking that also, started to pace the room. "What the fuck is going on?" he yelled again, to vent out the frustration that was getting out of control very quickly. Ted was calmly pouring the hot water in 2 cups, not paying any attention to Harry raging in the room. But Harry was quickly losing his lucidity, and, trapped in his rage, brought up by shock and fear, lunged toward Ted. He caught him from the collar of his jumper, slamming him against the wall. "What's going on?" he snarled, his eyes flashing. Ted didn't answer, didn't even flinch. Not intimidated at all, stared steadily back straight into his eyes. And there was something in the stare that was turning quite dark all of a sudden. Something quite baleful. Something Harry wasn't accustomed to see there, that brought him back to senses in a second. As if touching burning coals, he let go of Ted straight away. "I'm sorry," he muttered. "It's quite right," Ted replied composedly, straightening his jumper and shrugging his shoulders. "I'm sorry," Harry repeated, mortified. "It's okay. Don't worry," Ted replied with a smile, his eyes of a limpid, reassuring ice blue like usual. "Do you want a cuppa?" he said, tilting his head in direction of the tea. Harry nodded and dropped again on his chair. Ted put in front of him a cup of fuming tea and sat likewise, blowing on his own. The silence stretched again, and Harry, resting his elbows on the table, prodded his feverish head on his hands. Why didn't I move away when I got the chance. I should have stayed away from Ginny for her own good. I should have saved air and sunrise from myself. He mumbled darkly. You forget that if you did, Sunny wouldn't exist, Ted replied, sipping his tea. Nor James, he added. Nor Albus, he continued. But not receiving an answer from Harry, who was still in his despondency, went on. And Ginny, with any probability, would have ended up back with Dean Thomas. Harry looked up suddenly. Or perhaps with that Quidditch player. What's his name? He asked, frowning in reflection, blowing again on his tea. Philo... Harry interrupted him sharply. I'm glad I stayed. Ted sniggered, followed by Harry, who sat back against his chair more at ease. Okay, far away. I'm ready to listen composedly to your theories, which I'm sure will be very pleasant and comforting, he said ironically, tucking his arms behind his head to stretch his stiffened muscles. Ted smiled sadly. I'm sure I don't need to explain them. I'm sure you have already a pretty clear idea of my theories on the matter. Harry sighed wearily. The answer had always been there, despite the confusion felt. Ted arched his eyebrows. There were many quite violent and clashing feelings involved, referring to that event never really acknowledged fully between each other, which Harry always hoped to be able to forget, but never did. He took his cup and brought it to his mouth, listening to Ted's words. I'm not an expert of this kind of magic. It's old, and it's a branch not much explored or known. But it could be an explanation. Harry's mind was brought back to what Dumbledore had told him about the protection casted unawarely on him from his mother when she died to protect him. That was old magic too. Although he was also an Auror, and, despite not being a great reader, his knowledge about dark magic was extended. He was of the mind that to fight something, you must possess a thorough understanding of it. And this was very similar to something he had read. Something he had canvassed amply with Hermione and Ron many years back. Lost in this gloomy elucubration, almost forgot about Ted's presence, who was observing him archly. It's not. His voice fluttered in the room, making me startled. It was such a direct answer to his doubt that for a moment he thought to have imagined it. What? It is not an Horcrux. This answer left Harry greatly bemused. As far as he knew, nobody knew about Horcrux beside himself, Hermione, Ron, and recently Ginny. It was not part of the common knowledge, being a very dark branch of magic. The puzzlement on his face was so marked that Ted felt impelled in explaining himself. Hermione told me about it. I asked her to lend me the books in her possession and I studied them thoroughly. Why? When? How? Harry stammered, dumbfounded. Ted sniggered. There were some points not very close to me about the Voldemort bringing down, and I wanted to explore the matter in depth. If you want to understand a person, you must dig in his past and... Did you want to understand about Voldemort? Harry interrupted, baffled. Ted paused to look at him. I wanted to understand you, he said in the end. Harry was so taken aback and felt exposed under that gaze. He was about to ask why Ted never asked him instead of Hermione, but then relinquished the question. The why was obvious even to him. He wouldn't have answered. So instead, he asked with a lighter tone in which it was easy to detect some irritation. So when did you start to indagate on my past, if I'm allowed to know? That irritation was misplaced. It was only his fault if Ted had been obliged to look for other means to know about him, as he was very well aware. Nevertheless, he didn't manage to hide it. The thought to be an object of study didn't please him. Ted took his cup, turning it in his hands. When I started to go to Hogwarts. At 11, Hermione told you about Horcrux? He asked, bewildered. Ted shrugged. Why not? Harry frowned, unconvinced. It was true that Ted at 11 was very different from James Albus at the same age. He'd always been a mature boy since he could remember. His childhood, if ever had been, was over very quickly, and was rarely seen playing with other children of his own age, mingling instead with adults, listening attentively to their conversations, silly or serious they were, without exception. But still, to Harry, it seemed to be early at 11 to know about murders and splitting of souls. Apparently, Hermione wasn't of the same mind. Anyway, I asked for the books only recently, he continued. When I started to understand about this connection between you and Sunny, I wanted to get to the bottom of it. And it's not an Horcrux. How'd you know? He asked, suspicious. Ted sat back on his chair pensively, his cap still in his hands. Because, he started, weighing his words. First of all, you must kill to create one. Harry looked at him darkly. Ted, let's not play naive here. We both know I killed people. Ted looked away uneasy, but Harry knew he was very well aware of the thing, despite it had never been admitted openly. A few times he had been obliged to do it. It was a possibility when fighting against dangerous individuals. He always tried to avoid it whenever possible. He was part of the Windsor Gamut, being the head of his department, and he had a say on the matter, but abiding by the law and with a fair trial. Therefore, he tried to avoid it. However, he knew that if the situation got out of hands, it was his duty to act. Hesitation could prove fatal, and in such moments was essential to put aside his scruples and intervene to end it with the least possible casualties. And it could be obtained only dirtying his hands. That doesn't count, Ted continued, clearing his voice. Harry knew he condemned the whole thing, but he couldn't allow this to make him falter in what was his duty. You should have done it in that occasion, uttering a spell. It needs to have intention to be merciless and without scruples, and I'm sure it is not your case. He continued steadily, bringing back his eyes on him. And that much was true. He never relished in it. He didn't enjoy it at all. It always left him with a sense of bitterness, and on every occasion, for some strange reason, Ted's opinion weighed on his shoulders. Those people, more often than not, had been subjected to many unpleasant experiences, like lack of love in infancy, abuses, troubled past, who made them what they were. Spookily similar to his own past. So then why he had managed to grow up following the right path, and they didn't? What was the difference? He must have been their fault. They chose what to become. He encouraged himself with this consideration when such a moment occurred to prod himself to do what he knew it must be done. And yet, there was always a moment, before life abandoned their eyes, a very short one, in which it seemed possible to see their soul just before everything ended, and he could see their fear for the unknown that united all mankind. It wasn't pleasant. What happened to Voldemort in your regards had been only because he pushed the thing too far. He took a sip from his cup, and let's not forget that the only way to invert the process of splitting soul is remorse. Even in case unawarely you created one, it would have been dissolved a moment later. Harry reflected on his words, and was reminded of Hermione explaining him and Ron the same thing. And he could admit now, after having experienced it, that remorse was indeed one of the most painful things he had endured. I think it's more similar to what happened in regards of your mother. Do you know that too? Harry snapped unnerved. Yes, Harry, I told you I made some thorough research, and instead of being vexed, you should thank me. Ted retorted reprovingly. Harry grunted and folded his arms on his chest, offended in being told off by a boy that didn't grow a proper beard yet. "I don't like it," he muttered grumpily. Ted laughed. "Well, it's coming handy now, isn't it?" But then, regaining his pensive demeanor, retrieved his consideration almost as if Harry wasn't there. "What your mama's done was not planned. She wasn't even aware of it. It just happened because of these strong feelings she was living at that moment. A strong love, surely, but also fear, and hope to be able to save you. The emotional charge was very strong." He paused and looked in his cup, where the amber liquid was tepid now. "I guess it happened the same with you," he said, his gaze fluttering toward him worriedly, knowing he was about to say something not very pleasant to hear. "All that hate and wish to hurt her," he said, knitting his eyebrows together and looking away, fiddling with the cup. "You wanted her to feel what you were feeling," he continued, resting the cup on the table, uneasy, while Harry was hunched on himself under the weight of his words. "But at the same time," he continued, brightening, full of purpose, "the remorse, the sorrow that united you, the love you felt for her, all these mixed, colliding feelings in a moment in which you were creating a new life. It left a trace, I suppose, and surely, being Harry Seer, therefore more sensitive than normal people, it was enhanced," he concluded. Harry sighed, running ahead in his hair. All what Ted had said made sense, but not for that reason was making it better. He shook his head dismayed. "This is worse than anything, Ted. Do you realize what it means?" Harry's mind was never at ease. Strong emotions were part of his life. Sunrise was destined to a life of torments only because his life had been full of torments that were still racking him now. Ted, however, smiled sadly. "Quite so, Harry. It means that from now on, you must strive for happiness." They talked for some time after that sentence, canvassing the meaning and working of such a connection. But it was difficult to explore. None of the two had enough knowledge on the matter, and Sunrise was still too small to answer questions about it. They could only wait and see how it developed. Ted had strongly advised him to talk it over with Ginny, but Harry was against it and had forbidden Ted to mention it to any living soul. This was something they must have kept secret at any cost. His sensible part was always suggesting him the right thing to do, and in this case it would have been to affront it with Ginny. Ginny was intelligent, loved him, and didn't condemn him. Surely she would have been supportive in this occasion like she had always been in his regards. Harry knew all of it and would have loved to be able to abandon himself to this knowledge. But there was also the dark part of him, always ready likewise to instill doubts and fears. What if, reminding of what he had done, discovering he had crippled their daughter with it, she would realize he wasn't such a good person after all? What if she had ceased to love him? He wasn't ready to take that risk. He needed time to absorb it, and he nurtured this unavailing hope as well that Sunrise would grow out of it. When Ted was gone, he had gone to check on Sunrise. She was sleeping soundly, the imprint of her tears still on her cheeks. He watched her for some time, enshrouded in gloom, a gloom he knew from then on wasn't going to afflict only himself. Chapter 15. Getting ready for departure. The wedding was approaching fast. Luna was serene and carefree as usual, and Ginny, with the help of Hermione, to counterpart Luna's lack of practical sense, had improvised themselves wedding planners, and were supervising everything from their respective countries. The venue, following Luna's wishes, was going to be on the beach in Australia to enjoy the warmth of their summer. Luna had expressed, moreover, the wish of an endo there, and asked Ginny and Hermione to join her a week before the event to enjoy a holiday together on the seaside. Ginny was over the moon. "Do you mind? Mama could go and pick Sunrise up from the kindergarten so you don't have to mind about working late," she asked him, excited, as soon as Luna's request was made. "We never got a holiday all together, and this might be our last chance." Harry, seeing her excitement, smiled. "Go and enjoy yourself." They were sitting on the sofa. Sunrise had been asleep for already an hour, and they were enjoying the warmth of the living room's fire. "Are you going to come to the wedding, though? Are you?" she had asked, then, narrowing her eyes suspiciously, the cheerfulness swept away in a blink. "I'm not sure I'll be able to. It's quite far. It will take me almost 30 hours by plane," he answered wearily. These had started to be an almost daily conversation, and very often finishing with Ginny's grump. "With flu powder, it's only gonna be a few hours at most. They never even ask you for papers," she replied pleadingly. "First of all, I strongly disapprove of it. It's dangerous and absolutely unmotivated." Ginny rolled her eyes as he continued. "And anyway, you know what it means going by flu powder. The whole Australian magical community will be there waiting for me, arms open." He grunted bitterly. He always avoided using magical transportation system, as it was a giveaway of any of his whereabouts. Every time he used it to travel to a different country, an aggregation of politicians, influential people, and simply curious were there to welcome him, and that always marked the beginning of invitation of every kind. "But it's Luna's wedding," she snorted, this time unnerved. "We never go anywhere. We never do anything. For once I'm asking you one thing," she ranted on. "You could stay only a few days, and the magical community will find it out anyway, flu powder or not. They always know," she concluded snappish. It was indeed true that she avoided doing mini break of any kind. It was always motive of distress, being recognized and bothered everywhere. It seemed there were always reporters who had as ambition in life to tail him wherever and discover as many things as they could about him. Harry, knowing very well to what kind of mood this conversation was leading, and wanting very much to spend the relaxing evening between cuddles, tenderness, and hopefully something more, took a sudden resolution to make it bend toward his wishes. "You are right," he said, closing the newspaper he was perusing, abandoning it on the coffee table next to an open witch weekly Ginny had been reading in the afternoon. To confirm her affirmation, there was an article about them visiting Brighton during Christmas holiday. A picture of the whole family had been taken with them walking on the pier. Albus was taking a picture of the landscape. James was showing a seagull to a sunrise, and behind him and Ginny, hand in hand, were closing the line. The article was already speculating about their next holiday destination. "Let's make a deal," he said, turning to her, who instantly sprang to attention. "I'll work extra hard in the next few days. If, nevertheless, I won't manage to track the guy down, I'll come there by flu powder only for the day, and I'll be back the next." She nodded, a bit grumpily. "But if I do track him down before then, and your parents agree, we leave them city, and, trying to be as discreet as possible, we take 2 weeks for traveling. Just me and you. What do you think?" Since having James, they had never managed to go on holiday, just the two of them. It wasn't easy for him to get days off outside summer and Christmas time, and in those periods they wanted to enjoy the kids' company as much as possible. Therefore, it was several years they couldn't indulge in the pleasure of a romantic trip. For that reason, the answer took the form of an acute shrill of delight, and he found himself suffocated by Ginny's enthusiasm as she threw her arms around his neck and started to cover his face with kisses. "That's a lovely idea! Mom and Dad will agree for sure! Do you think you'll be able to? How far are you in your research?" Harry, laughing at this enthusiastic response, answered her, "We might be on a good track, but keep excitement under control. I cannot promise you anything." Ginny didn't even hear his answer, all taken by the prospect that was unraveling under her eyes. "It's going to be so nice! We could go and visit the Great Barrier Reef. I always wanted to go there. And then we can do a boat trip, stay in a nice hotel. I'll buy a guide tomorrow." Harry interrupted her, getting slightly alarmed. "Ginny, I said I cannot promise you anything. Don't go planning everything yet." Ginny turned suddenly stare, as if only at that moment realized he was there. She loosened her arms from around his neck. "What are you doing here? Shouldn't you be in the office working? I don't want you to see at home before 8 tomorrow," she admonished him. Harry laughed and pinned her in his arms. "I'll do my best, my love. But will you love me anyway, even if I don't manage to?" he whispered playfully in her ear. She tilted her head, smiling. "I don't know. We'll see how much effort you'll put in it." That evening concluded very satisfactorily for Harry, and the next day he found himself whistling while walking to work, a thing that hadn't been happening for a while. Luna's event had given him an idea, and he was quite keen to put it into action. He couldn't wait to see Ginny's reaction, and grinned, thinking how Siri would have been happy in those days at the Borough. Ted was right. He only needed to make his life as pleasant as possible. Easy. In high spirit, waved cheerfully at the groupies, who loudly hooted back all sort of appreciation in a way that made an old witch scowl disapprovingly, and stepped over the door of the ministry full of purpose and with a smile on his face. The days followed one another very quickly, and the good mood vanished as quickly. The wizard was leaving traces, mistakes along the way. Spies were working undercover in the darkest circle and was slowly starting to give results. Harry was working tirelessly, determined to solve the situation as fast as possible. Some disappearance occurred in the Muggle War too, giving precious clues. Harry was collaborating with Muggles law enforcement in incognito to gather information. He took most of the dangerous task on his shoulders, as he didn't want to be responsible of any other death among his colleagues, and was getting home very late every night. Ginny was growing steadily more preoccupied with each day, witnessing him returning at home later and later, very often in an impenetrable gloom, and always shattered to death. At one point, she had forbidden him to get back after 8 o'clock. "Are you crazy or what?" she hissed under the voice, not to wake Sunrise up, when one day he had been back at 1 o'clock in the night, reaching a peak of 17 hours work without intermission to eat or repose. She was waiting for him in the kitchen, and had attacked him as soon as he stepped in. "I don't care about anything nor anybody," she continued. "You don't get back at 1 o'clock in the morning. It is just not right, without calling or warning me in any way." She kept hissing, tapping a miniature finger against his chest. "And I was here warning sick, alone, and you, who the fuck knows where?" Harry, with a fuzzy mind brought by tiredness, was soon unnerved by her rebuke, but hearing her swearing, the irritation disappeared in a flash. It didn't happen very often, and opened his consciousness on the reason of her vehemence. "Don't you dare do it again!" she kept on hissing, but Harry, perceiving some tears in the corner of her eyes, drew her in his arms, while she was still scolding him furiously, and, despite her flailing to free herself, he kept her pinned in that embrace. "I'm fine," he simply said. Hearing it, she paused, and, after a moment, letting her hands that were trying to push him away drop, succumb to sobs. I thought, she wailed under her voice. I'm fine, he only repeated her. He had always done his best to screen her from the gruesome and the disturbing of his job, but, year after year, she couldn't fail to understand how dangerous it could get. The inferi episode had been on every newspaper, and it wasn't difficult to add 2 plus 2 and realize that only a fluke had saved her in that occasion. On keeping a sobbing Ginny against him and stroking her hair consolingly, Harry reflected that maybe the moment to retire was getting closer. Perhaps he could ask to be relocated. Perhaps he could find a job in the Quidditch environment. If there was something good in his situation was that every career was open to him. He only needed to pick and choose. When Ginny grew calmer and got back to her steady and stern self, forced him to go down a soup, and she lined down some new unbreakable rules. 1. Not working after 8 o'clock. 2. 1 day off per week, possibly 2. 3. Eating regularly, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. 4. Last but not least, always do what Ginny says, because she knows best. Only when he agreed to everything was he allowed to go to sleep. And without informing him, she switched off his alarm and sent a note to his department informing that he would have got in late. He slept until midday. He almost had an heart attack finding out the next day, but then he noticed beside the activated alarm clock a very stern note from Ginny reminding him the rules laid out in the evening and in order to eat some lunch before going to work. That night, he was back at the stroke of 8. Ginny regained her composure and usual cheerfulness, and Harry promised himself not to let her worry in that way anymore. The day of her departure was approaching, and he didn't want her to leave with a sense of foreboding. By her part, she hadn't mentioned again about their trip or dark wizard capture, afraid of triggering him again in a frenzy of overwork. The evening before her departure, Harry was sitting on the edge of the bed, watching Ginny busy in rummaging in the wardrobe, occasionally pulling out a dress, observing it critically, and then either tucking in the big open luggage on the bed with a smile or shoving it back mercilessly in the wardrobe with a frown. When she had informed him of her wish to go, Harry had agreed sternly, seeing how much her heart was in it. But now, watching her gaily filling her luggage, could only think that the following day, for a week, he would have been alone, and that thought sobered him considerably. He wasn't used to being by himself without her, nor used to sleep in the bed without her presence. He considered bleakly whether to sleep on the sofa the next day to avoid the sense of forlorn in not having her by his side. His gaze wandered lazily on the open luggage, and something colourful caught his attention. He fished from it a small triangle of fabric. "What's this?" he asked in a fit of contrariety to Ginny. She, emerging from the wardrobe, looked at it fleetingly. "A swimsuit," she said, before putting back again her head between her clothes. "A swimsuit?" Harry mumbled with a frown. "Yes, of course. It's hot there, and we are planning to enjoy the beach as much as possible." Her voice came between the noise of anger moved here and there. Harry looked again at the flimsy little piece of fabric, and rummaging in the luggage, found the other part, 2 more insignificant triangles. He remembered Ginny wearing it only the summer before, and his frown grew marked. With this inconsistent, not much covering piece of swimwear in his hands, asked again, "Let's get this straight. Is it just gonna be you, Luna, and Hermione, right?" An affirmative murmur came from the wardrobe. "And Sean?" "I guess so. He's from there." Harry rummaged deeper in the suitcase to see what she had packed. Many summery dresses, one more unsuitable for holiday with female friends without husband than the one before, under Harry's opinion. And he's gonna do a stag party, I imagine. He mumbled sourly, continuing his exploration in Ginny's luggage. I didn't ask, but I suppose so, she murmured, and then coming out from the wardrobe with 2 dresses, turned to Harry. Harry, which one? She asked, showing them to him. Harry, watching those 2, definitely too short, definitely too see-through to be worn without him on her side dresses, stooped his head on one side in consideration. Why don't you take some witch robes? You only packed the one for the wedding. She laughed. We're going to be among muggles. It would look strange, and you never liked them anyway. Why do you want me to take them now? She asked, observing critically the 2 dresses, dropping them on her body alternatively in front of the mirror. Harry didn't answer. He never liked them, it was true, but their ankle-length and shapeless feet seemed all of a sudden very fetching, considering he was not going to be around. Which one? Ginny pressed on, waving the 2 dresses in front of him. Harry, mutinously, pointed to the one that seemed slightly more covering, and Ginny, obviously, after weighting them up some more, packed the other one. And there are going to be all Sean's friends at his stag party, I suppose? He asked, with the swimsuit still in his hands, while Ginny had walked from the wardrobe to the bathroom, choosing carefully between the hundreds of bottles on the sink. Ginny looked at him as if he was a bit damp. I should say so. Certainly he's not going to celebrate by himself. Harry pictured in his mind a pack of Australian tan guys of barely 26 at the stag party, and remembered in a flash all the stag parties he had participated as well. Not many, to be honest, but enough to know what they were talking about. After Ron's one, he could barely remember his name. He was sure not to have done anything to repent, only because Percy, always sober, had supervised the whole thing. He took a step farther in his train of thought and saw Luna, who, in her worst day, didn't look older than 19, blonde hair, blue eyes. And then he saw on the other side Hermione, good-looking, quite curvy. And then, in the middle of them, like a nymph, he saw his Ginny, slender, cut golden eyes. He craned his neck to look in the bathroom. She had a silky cream nightie on that shifted morbidly on her fair skin, her lean legs moving gracefully around the bathroom. He put the 2 groups together on an Australian beach and didn't much like what he saw. I think I've been a bit hasty in my decision of letting you go, he said, moving his gaze from the swimsuit to her, his vision completing itself in Ginny with that minimal swimsuit on, surrounded by the Australian pack. He darkened considerably. I'm starting to change my mind. Ginny laughed, filling her beauty case to the brim with cosmetics. It'll be fine. I don't know. I see too much competition taking the shape of fit 20-ish Australian guys, and I don't like it much. Fit Australians in their 20s are not going to look at a 37-year-old woman. Don't worry, she said, shoving the beauty case in the luggage. I wouldn't know, Harry said. Luna is marrying one of them. Ginny chuckled. You can sleep tight, she said, standing in front of him, taking his face between her hands. There is no competition. Really? He said, not very convinced, dropping the swimsuit that glided on the floor without a sound to take her waist, enjoying the sensation of the silk slipping under his fingers. An affirmative murmur came back. Can I know why? He asked, looking up. Are you fishing for compliments? She asked, puckering her lips prettily. Maybe, he said, half smiling, sliding his hands under her silk nightie to touch the silk that lay underneath. I'm not going to wear them for a long week. I need to store them now that I can. She simpered. Well, I must find somebody handsome, somebody that make me laugh, brave and sweet, she said softly, while Harry was freeing her from one of the 2 silks, the roughest, leaving her covered only with her perfect nakedness. You can go on if you like, he murmured, brushing his lips on her flat tummy. Somebody who is quite sexy, a good man, and a good lover, she continued, running her fingers in his hair, and then grinning, added cheekily. And on the top of that, he must have incidentally saved England from the darkest wizard of all times. It kind of restricts the circle to only you, I dare say. Alright, you got me, he smirked, holding her on the bed with him.